Hello, world, and welcome to the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterlin, coming to you from the vacation destination known as Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and this is episode 35. On this week's episode, we're going to continue Restaurant Storytime. This is part 3, Attack of the Swans. I'll let that just sink in. We're going to take a road trip to the chocolate capital of America, Hershey, Pennsylvania. We're going to go way, way back in the day to some old school PSAs. This is something I'm really excited to share. I'll get into that. We're going to have a new top 5 that's filled with 1980s fads that came and went. Well, some may have stayed, but most went, thankfully. There's a new This Week in History and Time capsule with a story that I can't believe is true, but I can't wait to share it. All of this and more is coming up right now on episode 35 of the In My Footsteps podcast. Welcome in, everyone. Welcome to September. We're only a few days away from Labor Day and my favorite time of the year starting. Basically from Labor Day to the end of the year, to New Year's Eve. That's my favorite time of year. I like summer, but I love fall. The weather stays good through early November now. And there's just a lot less people on Cape Cod because it gets to a point there's only so much room on Cape Cod and people keep coming down. So I love the chance to get to go back out and explore all of what makes Cape Cod great with far less people. And plus there's lots of awesome holidays. Halloween. Then my birthday comes up, which is right around the 1-year anniversary of this podcast. Thanksgiving, Christmas. There's other family birthdays that come up. So it's just a great time, and I can't wait to get it started. Wanted to make sure that I gave a shout out and thank you to everyone that tunes into my weekly live streams. They're called Without a Map, Friday nights at 8 p.m. on Instagram. This last week, it was wild. Right before I went live, there was a coyote within 15 feet of my car where I was parked, and it decided that it was just going to take a dump right there. I thought it was a dog getting walked, but it was just a coyote. And I stepped out of my car and yelled at it. I said, "I see you over there." So the coyote stared me down while it took a crap in the grass. It was right before I went live, so I had to share that with everyone. And now I get to share it with you. Not saying that every live stream has craziness like that, but hey, you never know what the next one might have happen. I'm really excited because I think September is going to be a big month for the podcast. I've got the normal 3 full-length episodes and 1 bonus episode coming up, but I got a lot of great content that are going to be in those episodes. I try to make every episode as good as I possibly can, but as with anything, there's always some that you're more excited about than others. This episode here is no exception, but coming up, the bonus episode this month is going to be looking back at Nirvana's Nevermind album 30 years later, which I still can't believe it's that long, but I'm really excited to share that one. That's going to be episode 38. But until then, we got episode 35 starting now, and a wild story, I suppose, as we go back into Restaurant Storytime, and another one that I'm just really excited to get some feedback on. When you hear this story that is 100% true. So let's dive right into Restaurant Storytime III, Attack of the Swans, on episode 35 of the In My Footsteps podcast. Restaurant Storytime. It's one of my favorite segments. I'm so glad that I started adding these into the podcast. It's a chance to share some of the craziest stuff from my many years working in the restaurant industry. The only problem is I have to either not name names or make things very vague because some of these things I don't think everyone wants out there. But, you know, it's all for laughs. There's nothing that we did that was illegal or anything like that. But still, you don't know what people's feelings are towards having embarrassing and funny things about them shared all over the podcast world. This one, though, there's no real people involved. This one involves animals. Swans are everywhere in New England. In ponds, you see them all over. They're these beautiful big white birds. They've got the dark black eyes. It looks like they've got the nasal tape that you put to help the breathe right strips to help like over their beaks. They look like they have those. And they're beautiful, and people love to feed them, which there's signs everywhere, don't feed the birds, because even though they're beautiful and it's nice to feed them, they're not very friendly. They can be quite aggressive, especially if their babies are around. So this Restaurant Storytime kind of ties swans into my old job. Where I worked for the most part in the restaurant industry was right on the water. So we were prone to having, when the tide got high, swans would come in through these little creeks, and they'd be right at the edge of the property. So they'd be out there, and you could either walk down the road a little ways and watch them swim, and some customers would walk down, and I think some of them fed them. I mean, we didn't have a sign out there saying don't feed them, but they kind of did anyway. We in the kitchen, we would watch them. We would not feed them because we were told by our boss, don't. But we would have, sometimes the customers would come through the back. So we had this little fence, a tall picket fence, so you couldn't see what was going on back there. If some of the cooks wanted to smoke or were throwing trash away, that's stuff the customers don't want to see. It's like seeing how the sausage is made. Over the years, though, the swans got used to being fed. So obviously they were fed by customers or cooks and servers. They began to get more brazen, where they would climb up the side of the grassy hill, and they'd be either on the deck every now and then, or they would start to wander their way out into the parking lot. So just imagine you've got customers down on Cape Cod. The elderly population is a lot higher than most places except for probably Florida. But you'd have these people coming in to eat, and you'd have swans circling their cars and wandering through the parking lot looking to get fed and hissing at people if they didn't get fed. I don't remember any stories of swans attacking customers per se, like biting them or anything, but I do know that swans hissed at customers and chased them somewhat. And this was in the mid-90s. So this was the point where my boss, she told us, don't feed the swans. We've got to discourage them from coming out. And because just because they hadn't attacked a customer yet didn't mean that it wasn't going to happen. The best way that we came up with to discourage the swans from going out into the parking lot happened during winter when we would get a lot of snow. The swans would be circling around at high tide, and they would start climbing up the snowy hill to go out into the parking lot. I don't know how many cooks did this, but different ones would take shovelfuls of snow and shovel the snow at the swans to scare them away. So just imagine these swans coming up the hill. I mean, they're tall, 3 feet tall, kind of long, skinny necks, and they'd be coming up like a monster movie up over the hill, and they just get doused with shovelfuls of snow to knock them back down. Eventually, that did kind of stop the swans from going out in the parking lot. I think not being fed combined with the chance of getting snow thrown at you would stop the swans from risking it. But that didn't stop them from being in the area, and that's what leads to the main event of this Restaurant Storytime. One of the most memorable stories of all time as far from me working in a restaurant. This was a summer evening during the week where we had this restaurant I worked at. It was beautiful views of the water, and people would always basically fight over getting to get the best views. They'd want the tables right in the corner where you could see the water, see the boats coming in. On this night, there were swans swimming around. It was high tide, and the people were having nice meals, and it was a beautiful summer evening, and there's swans swimming out there, and it was not sunset, it was getting closer to it. I can't remember how many swans there were out there, but at some point, the swans decided it was time to fly away. So just imagine this nice, majestic scene with the colors and the sun, and it's summer, and these swans take off, and it's beautiful against the backdrop of summer on Cape Cod. And then, out of nowhere, this is 100% true, one of these swans flew into the power lines. And so, I can see it in my head. It flew into the power lines, knocked the power out in the restaurant. Obviously, the swan got electrocuted. This is in front of all these customers, a lot of them visiting Cape Cod, maybe for the first time. And it's this majestic scene. And it's like, look at the swans. And it flew into the power lines and got cooked. Naturally, this changed the mood in the restaurant. It knocked the power out, so that was a big thing. What happened next was our boss came in, and basically it was like we were drawing straws to see, because somebody had to go and get the swan, retrieve it, and throw it in the dumpster. So one of the cooks, he was the one that was the low man, I guess unlucky to have to go. He brought a garbage bag and some gloves. So just imagine, there could have been kids in the restaurant and such, and they're watching this cook go out there in his apron with a garbage bag and picking up this majestic swan that was just cooked in the power lines, and he had to throw it in the trash bag. And he's walking back with the trash bag because the swan, this was probably a couple hundred feet down the road. So it wasn't like it was out in the water. The power lines were over the road. So it was laying in the road. You had to watch him go walk down the road and pick up this big white bag of feathers and throw it in the trash bag. And he came back with the trash bag. He tied it up and threw it in the dumpster to make sure nothing got it. But I do remember for the next few weeks, we had the running joke in the restaurant was that we had actually used the swan as part of our specials because it was like fried chicken. Oh, man, I've had to pause this a couple times recording it because I just laughed so much. It's terrible that this swan died, but it's more of the scene of this picture-perfect evening on Cape Cod at this restaurant. You're having this great food, this great scenery, and, kids could be like, oh, Mommy, look at the swan, and then it just gets cooked in the power lines. I don't remember if the power came on that night either. That may have ended the night at the restaurant. That was just one of the most legendary stories of my time working in the restaurant, was just a swan flying into the power lines and knocking out the power in front of all these customers on a busy summer evening. There are other animal stories, especially at the restaurant that I worked at for a lot of the time, but those will be saved for another Restaurant Storytime. I hope you enjoyed this third installment of Restaurant Storytime, Attack of the Swans. And I hope that if you listen to this, that the next time you see a swan, you just close your eyes and imagine the scene that we all saw with it flying into the power lines. That was a long time ago, 25 years ago, but it's still funny to this day. Road trip time again. And it is time for the next stop on my epic 2019 trip all around the eastern seaboard. Last time that we did a road trip, we did the capital city of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Now we are going next door, basically, the next town over, the chocolate capital of America, the sweetest place you can go, and that's Hershey, Pennsylvania. A lot of the time, Hershey and Harrisburg, they're kind of promoted together. Even if you go to the tourism website, it's visit HersheyHarrisburg.org. So they're kind of a package deal. One town will promote the other and vice versa. But I wanted to split them up so they each got their own time to shine, because even though they're promoted together, they're not really the same place. Hershey itself is 15 miles east of Harrisburg. It puts it about 95 miles west of Philadelphia. As of 2019, the population there was 14,654, so it's just above a small town. Despite that, above all else, Hershey, Pennsylvania is known for one thing, really, and it's right in the name. So the Hershey Company was founded in 1894 by Milton Hershey. The company is well known all over the world for its chocolate. In 1900, Hershey sold its first milk chocolate bar. 1907 was when the Hershey's Chocolate Kisses first came out. So many other legendary products came around in the years that followed. 1939, they had the Hershey's Miniatures first started, which were originally samples to send out to people looking to sell the products in their stores. In 1963, Hershey bought the H.B. Reese Candy Company, which Reese Pieces, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, all of that legendary candy. By 1979, They had reached their first year, Hershey's did, of $1 billion in sales. You all know Hershey's. Just walking around Hershey, they have the street lights. Instead of being normal looking street lights, they're Hershey Kisses with the lights coming down underneath. Every pole has a different candy bar, but it's like a mascot candy bar with a face on it. So if you were driving through accidentally and didn't know what Hershey was or where you were, you would find out real quick. And it's a lot of fun to walk around and just get a feel for it. The main attraction, obviously, in Hershey is Hersheypark. It's been around for 115 years and is a 144-acre amusement park in Hershey. In the summer, when it's really busy, there's more than 70 rides and attractions, 14 roller coasters, a water park. The biggest ride is the Candymonium Hyper Coaster. That's the park's tallest, fastest, and longest roller coaster. It's 210 feet tall, can reach speeds of 76 miles an hour, and extends for more than 4,600 feet, which is almost a mile. The thing that I found neat about Hershey is the fact that, like I said, it's a small town, 14,000 people. So think of a town that has that many people or that few people, and just imagine this huge amusement park there. It's sort of like a juxtaposition where I'm walking down these main streets and they're nice. They're calm and quiet. There's a lot of people, but it's not like being in Boston or New York or Philly. And yet, a couple of 100 yards away, you could hear screams of people going through these rides. So it was a weird sort of mix. If you're not big into the rides in the amusement park, I definitely recommend Hershey's Chocolate World. Not only because it smells like chocolate as soon as you get in there, but you can get all kinds of souvenirs. You learn how chocolate is made, how the chocolate bars are made. You can create your own chocolate bar and either give it as a gift to someone or make it for yourself. They have several different resorts, places to stay when you're there. The Hotel Hershey, Hershey Lodge, and Hersheypark Camping Resort. So they got something for everyone. If you're interested in learning about the history of Hershey outside of the park, there's the Hershey Story Museum, and they've got a lot of the exhibits and stories of how the company was built. They've naturally got a gift shop and candy store. That's where I went because, like I told you, when I did this road trip, my time was kind of at a premium. So going and spending the day at Hersheypark as much as I wanted to wasn't feasible. If you've been listening to this podcast, think about all these places I've shared in the road trip segment the last few episodes. Scranton, Harrisburg, and Hershey, Pennsylvania. These are all the same day, and I'm still not done with this day. Next week, we're going to do Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and even then I'm not done. This is all one day. So the Hershey Story Museum was a perfect way to tie it all together and get the candy at the gift shop. They had chocolate-scented little mini candles. I got some of those. As I say with all of these road trip segments, especially based around this 2019 trip, go to each place and spend as much time as you can there. Don't be like me and rush through. Because as I research these to share with you on the podcast, I look at these places like, oh man, I wish I had spent more time at Hersheypark. I highly recommend taking the time. You can take the Hershey Trolley Tour. That's a way to go all around the town. It's basically, this town was built by Milton Hershey around his company. So it's really interesting to see what his vision was and just imagine him back in 1894 creating this company. And now here's this huge amusement park and all these resort hotels. If you don't want to take the trolley, they've got the bikes that you can rent. It's like they got the little things you put the money in and it unhooks it. And you can take the bike and ride around and you just bring it back somewhere else and hook it up. It's almost like a rent-a-car, but it's a little different. To learn more about Hershey and Hersheypark and Hershey, Pennsylvania, you can check out thehersheycompany.com. That'll give you the history of the company itself and Milton Hershey and the headquarters that are located in Hershey. I walked over to those, and in the parking lot, there's all these cars that are just wrapped, like they look like candy bar wrappers. So you've got Hershey and Reese's and Fifth Avenue and all these that are just cars. And those were a lot of fun. I think they were all electric vehicles too. I mentioned it during episode 33, but again, check out visit HersheyHarrisburg.org to get more ideas of where to go and where to stay. Hershey is pretty obvious where to go and stay, but you never know. You might not be into Hersheypark, and there's a lot of other stuff to see too. And finally, check out HersheyPA.com. Again, these are 3 different websites. They're all going to tell you different shades of similar things on what to see and what to do in Hershey. I would recommend, if you don't want to go to Hersheypark, which is going to be crowded, find a place to park and just walk around, because that's how I found the museum, was just parking and walking around. I didn't have the time to go to Hersheypark, so I had to find other ways. Enjoy it. Definitely check out the sweetest place in America, the chocolate capital, Hershey, Pennsylvania. It's fun for the entire family. And I'll be back in episode 36 for the next road trip, which is going to be very different from Hershey, Pennsylvania. This is a Civil War American icon, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I was very thrilled and humbled to be able to go and visit this spot. So it'll be a very different vibe, but still just as interesting next week on the next road trip. It's September. Summer is coming to an end. Kids are going back to school. The weather's about to get crisp and beautiful for fall. Perfect time to find something new and great from Wear Your Wish. Katie Marks' company has got all you need to look good for fall, to feel good for fall. She's got totes and bags for those going back to school. She's got hoodies as the weather starts to get cooler. You want jewelry, she's got jewelry and bracelets, accessories. Be sure to check out the new coming soon Zen Corner, healing with the intention for your mind, body, soul, and space. The new t-shirt shop with new designs. Be sure to check out the Sully, which is dedicated to our grandfather, John Sullivan. You've heard me talk about him a lot. He was my hero, and now he is immortalized in t-shirt and sweatshirt form. And also the Newbie Nook, which will have all the new jewelry, accessories, and all the other new stuff hand-selected each month at wearyourwishes.com. High-quality fashion and style, easy online shopping. They're all over social media. Wear Your Wish, find them on Instagram. They're a great follow with more than just products for sale. There's lots of inspirational quotes that I find very helpful on a lot of days. So fall into fashion. Grab some great stuff from Wear Your Wish at wearyourwishes.com. And make sure to make a wish at 11:11. Time now for This Week in History, and one of the craziest stories I probably will ever have shared on this podcast. I couldn't believe it was true. I had to make sure to share this. This is a story of maybe one of the only TV shows to ever be canceled in the middle of a broadcast because it was so awful. We go back to September 3rd, 1992, 29 years ago this week, and the Naughtiest home videos event from Australia. Basically, this TV show was Australia's spin-off to their own funniest home videos. Like, we've got America's funniest home videos. They had Australia's funniest home videos. So Australia's naughtiest home videos, you can see where this might go. This show was, no lie, a show depicting videos of sexual situations and other sexually explicit content. The show was presented by Doug Mulray, and he had a lot of funny one-liners over the videos, but some of these videos, I can't believe they made TV. So let's dive into a list of some of the things that were shown on this show. If you're sensitive to this type of stuff, you might want to skip by. Content featured shots of animal genitalia, humans or animals humorously engaged in sexual intercourse. So funny sex, yeah, that's good for TV. People who get accidentally and humorously disrobed. There were videos like a kid grabbing a kangaroo's testicles, a man lifting a barbell with his penis, an older woman removing an envelope from a stripper's underwear with her dentures, two people running into the water with flaming pieces of toilet paper stuck to their butt, and two people filmed having sex in the middle of a public park. So just imagine, this is the debut episode, and there's all this stuff on network TV in Australia. It was featured on the 9 network, and the owner, his name was Kerry Packer, he was informed of what was going on the show while he was having dinner with friends. So then he found a way to turn it on and see what was on his network, and he called to the network screaming at them to get that off the air. They went to break with Australia's Naughtiest home videos on the line. They came back and it was Cheers. And they said it was technical difficulties, so they had replayed the show Cheers, but in reality it had been canceled 24 minutes into its first episode that was meant to go an hour. Ironically, despite the content being not really what you'd want on your network, there were a lot of calls of people complaining that it got yanked, that people liked it. It was reported that thousands of people called into the 9 network, and by estimates, upwards of 65% complained that it was taken off the air. You would have thought it would have been the opposite, that people would have wanted it taken off the air, but I guess that kind of sophomoric toilet humor, it can be very popular. Look at the movies that you can get. Mulray, the host, and basically everyone associated with that show was fired, so everybody lost their job. Ironically, though, Mulray did return to the 9 network to be a judge on the 2005 series Starstruck, and this was shortly after the owner, Kerry Packer, passed away. So that's the only way he got back on that channel, was when the owner of the channel died. So that was the wild story of Australia's Naughtiest home videos 29 years ago this week in history. And for the time capsule, we'll go back to the same day, but here in America. So 29 years ago this week, September 3rd, 1992, time capsule, the number 1 song in America was End of the Road by Boyz II Men. This was a massive hit off of their Cooley High Harmony album. It spent a then record 13 straight weeks at number 1, and in the end of the decade charts, the end of the 90s, it was listed as the number 6 biggest song of the decade. It was featured in the Eddie Murphy movie Boomerang and was certified platinum as far as single status goes. The number 1 movie was Sneakers. It starred Robert Redford, River Phoenix, Mary McDonald, and Sidney Poitier. It was a comedy crime drama about computer hacking. It made $105 million on a budget of $23 million. It's got a 79% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and it's classified as a classic rainy day type movie, so I think it comes highly recommended. I have not seen it, even though it came out during my going to the movies heyday. The number 1 TV show was Roseanne, which I believe has come up before in a previous This Week in History, but I'm not positive on that. Roseanne was a massive success about the Connor family. It lasted originally for 231 episodes between 1988 and 1997. It was number 1 for several years, and it was such a cultural phenomenon in America that it actually came back. The comeback didn't last long, though, because Roseanne Barr has kind of a big mouth, and she says things that she probably shouldn't say, and that's always been the way she was. So she got booted off her own show, and it became just the Connors after. And if you were getting ready to go back to school in 1992 like I was getting ready to start high school, and you wanted a nice, cool pair of Levi's jeans, if you lived on Cape Cod, you could go to Puritan, Cape Cod. We had 3 locations down here. You could get a pair of Levi's jeans for $31.95. When adjusted for inflation, it's about $62. And in looking around now, if you wanted to buy Levi's jeans, they range somewhere in the $40 to $50 range. So that means that they were actually overpriced back in the early 90s, and now they're cheaper. That's usually the inverse when I do these types of time capsule listings. That's going to wrap up This Week in History and another time capsule. But now it's time to dive into something else I've been looking forward to, the new top 5 list. This is going to be the top 5 1980s fads. These are things that I thought of. Maybe you've got a lot of different ones, but let's get that countdown going right now. Ah, yes, the 80s. My childhood. I always talk about how movies and music and video games and all this, I just feel like all that, I'm the old man now. This is my day was better. Some things have aged very well. Some things have not aged well. And that's what this top 5 is going to go into. The top 5 1980s fads. These are things that every kid and adult had or did. And most of them, I think, have faded away, but we'll find out. First, we've got some honorable mentions as far as 80s fads go. Honorable mention list, koosh balls, which was a rubber ball with those little different colored rubber filaments all around it. Hacky sacks, which were all the cool skaters used kicking around. Shoulder pads in women's clothing, which if you look it up, it's kind of weird looking even now. Leg warmers, which were everywhere as far as exercising, but then they became like part of people's outfits, which is just really weird. Breakdancing, which I guess is kind of still around, but back then it was everywhere. You put down a piece of cardboard in the street and just start doing these spins and such. And the final honorable mention is Swatch watches, which were everywhere. So those were the honorable mentions. Let's get into the actual top 5 1980s fads. Number 1, the Members Only jacket. Members Only was an actual clothing company. They're still around. And these jackets, they were like racer jackets, kind of like windbreakers, but a little bit better quality, I guess. Their very creative tagline was, when you put it on, something happens. They were everywhere. It was almost cliche at the time, especially the early to mid 80s, to have a Members Only jacket. But obviously the company faded away and it was relaunched in 2016. So you literally can pause this podcast and go to membersonly.com and get yourself a Members Only jacket. 35 years later, I guess they're back in fashion, or they're trying to get back in fashion. Number 2, calculator watches. I had one of these. I guess Apple watches that are out now are actually, you can do all the stuff that you do on a smartphone. Calculator watches, that was literally all you could do. And the buttons were so small to try to do any sort of simple addition. It's like you needed the tip of your pencil in school to actually use it. The main brand that sold these was Casio. And the funny thing is, if you go on Amazon right now, they've got vintage Casio calculator watches up there, $24.95. I think that's cheaper than they were back in the 80s when I had mine in school. It was probably more expensive then. Lots of kids had them. I think when we had tests back, 4th, 5th grade, I think we had to take them off. I didn't have mine for very long. Being 10, 11 years old, I probably ruined it. Number 3, and this one is for my sisters, the jelly shoes. These were slightly glittery, open-toed, really soft, rubbery type shoes. I just remember all of my sisters talking about their jelly shoes. They were slip-on, PVC plastic rubber. They had a shine to them. All the little girls wanted them. Although the exact origins of the shoes are unknown, it's claimed that a Brazilian company named Grenadine introduced them in the early 1980s. They really took off in 1983 when Bloomingdale's ordered thousands of pairs to sell, and that kind of made them hit the pop culture market. They're technically still around, so you can get some. So if my sisters want to get jelly shoes, I'm sure you can find them. Number 4, Trapper Keeper. So this goes back to everyone in school. The Trapper Keeper was a binder that it had kind of a soft sheen, foamy cover to it. They would have different designs with the Velcro to close it. And inside it had room for all these specific folders for specific classes. Everybody wanted one. Most people had them. I know I had mine. It was created by a company called Mead, and they've actually brought them back. So much like the Members Only jacket, you can get a Trapper Keeper too. So go out there, get a members-only jacket, a Trapper Keeper, some jelly shoes, and just live in the 80s again. Although it was originally launched in 1978 by Mead, it was huge in the 1980s. Go look up on YouTube commercials for it. At its peak, the Mead was selling more than $100 million worth of Trapper Keepers a year. And I know I was a part of that. Were you 80s kids? And number 5, perhaps the biggest fad, Rubik's Cube. It was a puzzle game with different colored squares, and you had to line up all the colors on one side to make them all match. It was originally invented in 1974 by Hungarian sculptor and professor of architecture Erno Rubik, and it was called the Magic Cube. In 1980, the Ideal Toy Company bought it, and from there it took off. It was worldwide. It became the best-selling toy, the best-selling puzzle game ever. As of 2021, more than 450 million Rubik's Cubes have been sold worldwide. And for those of you, or those of us, I should say, that had a Rubik's Cube and could never solve it, just to add a little salt to the wound, the record for the fastest time solving a Rubik's Cube is 3.47 seconds. I don't know how that's humanly possible, but yes, it's a Guinness record. How in the world can you solve that thing in less than 4 seconds? And the only thing I could do with that thing in 4 seconds is throw it in my closet and never use it again because I'd get frustrated by it. That wraps up top 5 80s fads. I'll be back in episode 36 with another random but fun top 5 list of things just in general in the world. Time to go way, way back in the day with a topic that I've wanted to share for a while. I'm really excited to share this and give some cool memories to people of my age group because I think you're all going to remember these things I'm about to talk about. Obviously, growing up on Cape Cod, being a child of the 80s, before school or on weekends, I would watch either Channel 56, WLVI, or WSBK TV 38. And they'd have certain commercials and PSAs, public service announcements, in the morning geared towards children and teenagers. And that's going to be what I talk about in this segment. The ones I remember, and I bet you, especially when I give you the links to where to go see them, it's going to bring major flashbacks to you. I have an affinity for old commercials because for some reason I enjoy that feeling of the retro. If you couldn't tell by this podcast, I'm a big fan of retro stuff. Back in the early days of YouTube, I started just looking up Boston television channel commercials from the 80s. That's something I've subscribed to several channels like that, and it's just a lot of fun to get lost for a few minutes in the old days. Over time, I would start to see these old PSAs that I remembered as a kid. And what I did was I got Real Player software, and I was able to rip the video from YouTube and save it because some of these channels are gone now. And so I made it a point to save all these commercials. I just went and checked my files on my laptop. I have more than 100 old commercials and PSAs that I remember downloading from back then. The first ones I'm going to share are the Abominable Snowman or Better Business Bureau PSAs. So he was like a puppet. Abominable Snowman, and he would do PSAs, like one was about saving your money and using it to buy things you want, like balloons and kites. One was about not littering. There was one in school about getting school lunch, and the snowman, Abominable, got cake and things, and then there was a bird that was with him that she got all good stuff, salad and orange and stuff. They were called Junior Consumer Tips. If you go to YouTube, and I'll put links in the actual description of the podcast, but the channel on YouTube is called Love to Register, and the channel is still there, and these videos are now 14 and 15 years old on YouTube, and they're from the early 80s, late 70s. That one you'll definitely remember. How about Woodsy Owl? Help Woodsy spread the word. Give a hoot, don't pollute. Now, those are everywhere. Most children of the 80s will remember Woodsy Owl, where he was that huge mascot, the owl with the green clothes and the big hat. They said, please keep America looking good. I think he's still around in one form or another now, but he started in 1971, Woodsy Owl, to just keep the forests clean and nature. For the kids of my generation, you'll remember that he was originally voiced by a man named Sterling Holloway, and you'll know him because he used to voice Winnie the Pooh. And so that's what I remember is Woodsy Owl and Winnie the Pooh had the same voice because they were voiced by the same man. There was an American Lung Association PSA with Superman in it from 1982. He had this packet of things called Super Stuff. I believe it was these kids were playing on a baseball field, and one kid didn't want to play because he had asthma, and he was worried about getting winded from asthma. And that's part of the American Lung Association and the Super Stuff. Another really famous one was McGruff the Crime Dog. That one I think everyone remembers. Even if you're not from that era, you've probably heard of McGruff, where he wanted to help take a bite out of crime. And especially the early 80s, there'd be things happening where Neighborhood Watch would see someone stealing a bike or someone trying to break into someone's house, and they would report it to the police, and the cops would come and arrest the people. And McGruff would be there to kind of say, you can help too, and things. He first came out in 1980, according to a 2008 survey that I found through Wikipedia, so you know. But 9 out of 10 people recognize him. Now, they could all be people my age, but, you know, he's very recognizable. Another one I remember specifically from WLVI was the Be Prepared PSAs for the Boy Scouts. And it was a song. People sung, Be Prepared. I don't know if that'll put the earworm in your head. Like I said, I'll put the links up on the description of the podcast so you can go and find them. Essentially, it was just a series of PSAs about joining the Boy Scouts and the fun stuff you could do, building things and campfires and such. The YouTube channel to find those is MSTS1, and that channel's got a lot of local WLVI, old commercials and such on it. Another series of PSAs that just have seeped into my subconscious from a child was the local dairy council ones. There was one that was Alice in Wonderland, where she's seeing all these different characters from the cartoon eating and telling her about different dairy things and why she should eat them. There was one that was Dr. Brainstein, who was telling this little kid about different things to eat for the dairy council. There was one that was like a pinball machine with things to, like how the 4 food groups. That was a big part of it. These were late 70s, early 80s. And I promise you, if you're my age, if you lived in the Northeast in the 70s and 80s, if you see these, you're going to remember them. A really rare one was Snuffy the Talking Fire Engine. And I guess this was in conjunction with Burger King. I remember in kindergarten, they had a Snuffy type fire engine came in and did a talk about fire safety. So I don't know if it was the same Snuffy or if they had a whole bunch, but it was an old antique looking fire engine with a face on it that was kind of terrifying, where the mouth would go up and down, but it was obviously being moved by someone. And they talked about, you know, stop, drop, and roll and all that stuff. But Snuffy, that's another one. There was an energy saving one with a squirrel in a tree, and he's playing music, and a giraffe comes over to have him go out, like to go hang out. And he's just going to leave, and he leaves his music on, windows open and lights on, and the giraffe is yelling at him about wasting heat and energy. That may have been another Better Business Bureau one. After this, I'll probably go and watch all of these, but right now I'm literally going from memory. And finally, the last one as far as these old school PSAs to share was the Time for Timer. He did the hanker for a hunk of cheese. That was his most famous one. I don't know what he was. He was just like a blob with feet and a hat, and he would dance and sing, and he had a cane. He also did something Sunshine on a Stick that was juice popsicles. He did the You Are What You Eat one. If you want to find a compilation for that, there's a channel, Rad Mardigan, on YouTube, and he's got a compilation. It's 5.5 minutes of all the old Time for Timer PSAs. And there were still more. I was getting the main ones that I remembered. There was like Chow Daddy, who was like a werewolf that was dancing around. And it's a weird one. Like he's doing the dance for different foods to eat. One of the best is, if you're from this area, is a guy named Robilar, who was a Martian, and he was eating candy bars, but then they had fruit, and he was all shocked about the fruit. He had this glittery bodysuit on, and he talks with the thickest Boston accent, which just is so funny because it's a Martian with a Boston accent. You can find that one. There's a channel, JRod49. That's where I got it. I downloaded it from that page. So I have all of these. Those are some of my favorite PSAs from my childhood way back in the day. Saturday morning or before school, these would all be on. Do you remember any of those? The Abominable Snowman, Woodsy Owl. Do you remember the Be Prepared Boy Scouts one? Any of the local Dairy Council or Time for Timer, Snuffy, all of them. It's so great that I can watch them, that I found them. And I'm hoping that if I share the links with you, that you'll get some nice flashbacks. And if you're younger, you'll look back at those and say, God, what the hell were these people thinking? But that's why I love the 80s. That's going to put a wrap on episode 35 of the In My Footsteps podcast. I hope you've enjoyed listening to it as much as I've enjoyed recording it. This one was a lot of fun, and I always like that you can kind of tell when I find topics that I can't wait to talk about. That PSAs one was great. If you ever have any questions or comments, shoot me an email at christophersetterland@gmail.com. You can email me through my website, christophersetterland.com. That's got links to the podcast, links to all my books. It's run by my oldest friend, Barry Menard. You heard a couple weeks ago I did my happy birthday wish to him. His birthday's past now, but happy belated again. You can find me on Twitter. Obviously, find me on Instagram and check out the live streams every Friday at 8 p.m. So this podcast goes up on a Thursday. So on the Friday, there'll be a live stream. If you tune into that, I just may have a whole bunch of photos of all those PSA characters to show you and jog your memory. Subscribe on YouTube. I've got new videos. I'm trying to put up as many as I can. 4K New England, I'm going to try to get back into now that September is here. Check out the In My Footsteps podcast blog. I've got a lot of new articles. I'm trying to work on that. I've recently done articles on the old Fiddlebee's restaurant and nightclub in Hyannis, the Shoot Flying Hill in Hyannis, tower and rest area. And before that, I did Henry and Elsie Bowman, who escaped Nazi Germany and ran 2 successful restaurants in Massachusetts from the 50s through the 1980s. Go to historypress.com if you want to buy a copy of my newest book, Iconic Hotels and Motels of Cape Cod. It's also available in all the local bookstores on the Cape, Amazon.com, naturally. I've got 3 books through the History Press, 3 books through Schiffer Publishing, so you can check out any of those. They're linked on my website, like I said, so go there. It's one-stop shopping. Check out my Zazzle store, Zazzle.com, Cape Cod Living, if you want an In My Footsteps podcast bumper sticker. If you want to support the podcast by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com, find the In My Footsteps podcast. Anything that gets donated, I use for advertising for the podcast. Donations are great, and yeah, I love all that. But the greatest thing you can do as a listener is share it, give it positive reviews on Apple and Spotify, and just let people know, because that's how you grow the audience. We're coming up on a year of me doing these podcasts, and I love it. It's a lot of fun. I've now gotten into recording the podcast in one shot. Before, I used to do the segments one at a time and then stitch it together. Now I just run through all of them. I think it helps with continuity of the podcast. As always, I wanted to make sure I thank all of you that have been listening, all of you that have shared the podcast, all of you that interact with me. That's a big reason why I did this. I wanted to share a lot of my passions and things that I thought that people could identify with. That's why I do some lifestyle stuff, the Restaurant Storytime, and the other topics back in the day and road trip and things like that. I feel like a lot of you can connect, and I'm finding that audience. Join me again next week for episode 36. Like I said, we're going to do a road trip to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. That's going to be a lot of fun to talk about. We're going to go way back in the day to my memories of what it was like getting ready to go back to school. That's going to be a lot of retro fun. I'll tell you all about Cape Cod's very first radio station, and it's not anyone that you've probably ever heard of. It only lasted a short time in the 1920s, and its story is pretty wild. I'll embarrass myself with a new top 5 of movies that gave me nightmares so you can laugh about them. There'll be a new time capsule, new This Week in History, all coming up next week, so I hope you'll join me for that. Above all else, take care of yourself, take care of your mental health. I'm coming up on a year without alcohol, and there's been so many different things, roadblocks thrown at me, and I'm sure you all have dealt with your own. COVID is something we all share, but other things besides that. I actually put a post on Facebook a few weeks ago that it was a miracle that I've gone almost a year without alcohol with all of the crazy crap that I've dealt with, work and deaths in the family and housing, having to find a new place to live. And I rely on family and friends to kind of have my back and recenter me. And I couldn't do it without those people. And I'm sure you all have your own inner circle of people that have helped you through. But most of all, take care of your mental health. Lean into the things that make you happy. This podcast makes me happy. Getting back into running makes me happy. Whatever it is for you, enjoy that more. And in this life, don't walk in anyone else's footsteps. Create your own path. And enjoy every moment you can on every step of this journey because you just never know. Happy Labor Day weekend coming up. I'll talk to you all again next week for episode 36. Come over for the live stream tomorrow night. Thank you all so much, and I will talk to you all again soon.